They need a global threat to institute a global government. And so far, you'll notice there's an old report called the Report from Iron Mountain. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it was a joke. It was a complete fabrication.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, I'm with that group of people that thinks that maybe it was a fabrication to deflect attention away from the reality. I'm still one of those people that thinks maybe even John Kenneth Galbraith was the real brains behind the hoax.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's a school of thought out there that thinks that he came up with the whole thing.
It'd have to be somebody as ingenious as he was.
Precisely. Yeah, precisely. But anyway, Report from Iron Mountain. If you haven't read it, folks, it's something to read just to familiarize yourself with the thinking of people like this. Because it basically comes up with 5 things that they could use to try and promote a global government. And each of the 5 things they point out, whoever authored this thing, points out that if they're going to institute a global government, they have to have a global crisis.
Right.
And if you look at what they talk about, they talk about pandemics, a health crisis. They talk about an environmental problem, or they talk about a weather problem, and then of course they talk about extraterrestrial invasion.
Right.
So, you know, there's 5 things. Look what has happened since 2016. They tried the pandemic.
Problems,
precisely. It ran into a problem. Now they're trying the climate change option, the weather problem, the environment problem, and that's not working out too well either. Although it's working out better than the planned scandemic, because they've got the technology to manipulate the weather. We're supposed to have, I mean, it's already April here, almost the middle of April, and we're still wearing our winter jackets outside.
Wow.
You know, this is nuts.
Wow.
And next week it's supposed to be wham bam slam dam. We're supposed to get all of this severe weather, followed by more cold, and then hot. You know, back and forth. So the weather thing is working out, but they have been. If you've read Report from Iron Mountain, they have been carefully seeding the ET threat for a long time, and they keep ratcheting it up very, very slowly. It's amazing to watch these people work.
Yes.
Because they do it in dribs and drabs, and you think, well, it's just another weird story in the New York Times.
Right.
No, you're watching the mighty Wurlitzer. These people are organists, and they know when to play the music and what stops to pull. That's exactly why they call it the Wurlitzer. It's
wow.
I do see them prepping the ET narrative for the final emergency powers grab. The problem is, here's the problem. I think anybody that believes these people or their media from this point on is nuts.
I think the goal is, how do we control? How do we expand our control and our rule? How do we literally dominate the world? And ideology becomes a tool, not the motivating force, but the tool to accomplish that objective. And so the tool that they have found that is most effective is collectivism. So almost everything they accomplish in terms of advancing their power and control is usually explained in a very benign way as being beneficial to society. They're either protecting people against terrorism or crime or drugs or pornography or against global warming destruction, or it's all in the name of helping people in some way. And that is the earmark of collectivism. And so I think, though, that these people themselves really don't have any ideology except conquest and rule.
They're already doing it. Like, this is not a conspiracy theory. This is happening. As you know, Senator Rand Paul said last week, he said, you know, people used to talk about this as sort of a conspiracy theory. It's not. It's literally in their meeting minutes and on their agenda on what they plan to do.
Yeah.
They've told us what they plan to do. It's laid out in front of us. I guess, as I've talked about here on the show, Catherine Austin Fitz has written about this extensively. You just go through what they're actually saying, and you see them implementing this, whether it's electric power grid control, buying up land, consolidation of power under one digital currency, so that you track everything that we are doing, vaccine passports, like all of these things for control, because that's what they want, is absolute control.
David Rockefeller said in 1991, "It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subjected to the lights of publicity during those years. But the world is now more sophisticated and prepared to march towards a world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in past centuries. This is a very old dream coming true. The New Atlantis by Francis Bacon, about the scientists ruling the world, but in this version with the bankers at the top."
So what's going on? Who's representing humanity? Is it the right people? Is it just the politicians who are being engaged with, or is there a bigger picture?
Oh, it's not the politicians. They're not involved in this. The politicians aren't even involved in governing their own societies any longer. I mean, who really believes this?
Yes.
You're in Australia, you're in a place that is utterly dominated by the United States and, let's say, the World Economic Forum, and probably let's throw in the Bilderberg Group, which are all the same. That's who runs your country. That's who runs my country. The politicians don't have any control over their own countries. And so I think it's, we got hint of it again in the Davis Wilson notes. We're talking about money, very big money, private corporate money, but behind that is even more powerful money, I think. And I think what you have are powerful financial actors that they do what they've done for years. They get their hooks into national governments and control them in the areas that they want to control them. They determine policy in the areas where they want to determine policy. These days, it's an implementation of a global revolution, frankly, to transform all of humanity. That is exactly what they're doing. But they also, I'm assuming this here, I'm presuming, have had their hooks into the UFO tech issue. Now, the question is, who are the people? I think some of them have attended Bilderberg meetings. I think some of them have attended WEF meetings. I think those are the kinds of people we're probably talking about. Or maybe they're the people who are too big to attend those meetings, if that's a thing. We have a very opaque system of power in this world, and it masks itself as democratic and all of that nonsense. None of that is true. None of that is true. We have this fiction that the Western nations are somehow filled with sovereign people who, we have this thing we call democracy, which is, it's absurd. Do people really believe this? Some people, I guess, try to convince themselves it's true, but so we don't really understand the nature of our political system anyway. What do we have? Do we really have a democracy? Well, okay, no, we don't. So what is it? Is it an oligarchy? Well, can we be a little more specific? It's difficult because there's no public discussion on this, and for a reason. There's a reason there's no discussion about it, because that's not something that is desirable to come out. It's like in America during the 1940s, no one talked about the mafia, even though it was there. You don't discuss these things because it implicates too many powerful people. And that's where we're at with the global governance these days. So to answer,
it works. Their goal, of course, is world domination. And their method was to control the various nations of the world from behind the scenes. That they would select the political people that would stand up and be obvious to everybody, but they would select them. They would control them. And they would control all of the support mechanisms, the media. They would control the banks in particular. It was very important to control the money systems. And they would meet regularly to discuss policies and make decisions of what to do in the upcoming months. And the Bilderberg Group is one of those groups. Once you understand what Quigley was talking about, it perhaps is one of the most important international meetings of this secret society.
The ultimate goal is a George Orwell 1984 style totalitarian superstate using the new technology that's coming out to enslave and oppress the entire planet. That's their goal.
Do you think the Bilderberg Group has the power to decide who will be the next president of the United States?
Absolutely. They are the ones that sort of coordinate and decide amongst the ruling classes and coordinate where their funding is going to go, who's going to get funded, who's going to get promoted, who's going to get slandered, who's going to get attacked. It's very clear from the leaks that come out of Bilderberg that they are the ones that decide who's going to be president. Who Bilderberg decides to put their power and finance behind is who becomes the next president.
No one, I think in not just the United States, but in the world, achieves any amount of power without being guilty of some great crime. They have to have something on you if you are progressing to a higher office. They've got to be able to hold the end of that leash to be able to rein you in. Lord knows what they have on Obama. Nobody is put in power unless they can blackmail them, unless they can rein them in, unless they're guilty of some grand crimes.
Everybody is compromised in Washington, brother. We're compromised. The Russians used to use what's called honeypots. You'd travel somewhere and some attractive person, man or female or whatever, they used to do it a lot with gay folks because they could because back the stigma of being a homosexual, and now there's no stigma attached to it. But they would set them up, they'd film it, and then, you're getting ready to make a key vote. Somebody comes, hey, man, heard about you in that motel room on, whatever. And they go, what? And he said, yeah. I said, man, we don't need that to get out. Oh, man, I don't want that out. That'll ruin my family. That's okay, man. We just need your vote on this. Oh, you got it. And that's how they own your ass. And they do it through jobs. They do it through, trips. It doesn't have to be sexual in nature.
It's just traps.
It's just traps, yeah. And, as they say, no man's an island. And they figure out, they analyze you, they know what they got. And these staffers they are the swamp, some of them are. They run too much of it, and we allow it.
Where do you think that the motivation comes from, especially from people in your own party trying to discredit you, or whoever's decision it was to pull you off chair in that hearing? Where's the motivation coming from?
Got too much attention. We're turning over too many stones. Too many people were getting uncomfortable.
So are these people being paid?
I don't know. I don't know what they're doing. Honestly, it's the swamp. It's the crookedest thing I've ever been around in my life. But everybody says, what's your biggest surprise when you got to Washington? That I was not surprised, because it's just human nature, and they play upon it. People want to be liked. They want to be popular. They want to have money. They want power.
I think it may be coming from the reverse engineering, supposedly reverse engineering projects, and maybe some of these military industrial complex companies may be paying people off to try to discredit you.
Well, they can take them to dinner one night and then say, hey, we got this little condo down here at the beach. Why don't you bring your girlfriend or boyfriend or both down to the beach or something? And, they get their tentacles into them, their claws into them, and then they just own them. And it's just they develop a relationship, and everybody wants to be liked. And I get it. I'm not angry at anybody. I'm not even disappointed. I'm not even surprised. It's just what I deal with on a daily basis, just about on any issue.
It's the way it is up there.
Basically, Armed Services Committee members select the generals and they select the senior high-level officials, essentially, right? You're paying these people to do what you want. You're expecting some return. They're not just giving this money out of the goodness of their heart, okay? They're giving this money because these Congress people now, they have an access, and now they can call them when they need something to make sure that funding increases, okay? They will give $100 million so that they can get $10 billion out. Okay, think of it like an advertising marketing campaign for these defense contractors. That's what they're going to do. And I worked with defense contractors. I actually worked with Lockheed Aero in Phoenix at Luke Air Force Base. I was in charge of the contract there for 2 years. And I have to say, those guys were amazing, okay? At the grassroots, the people at the lower levels working for these companies, Lockheed Martin, Lockheed Aero, etc. I think they are just like I was, okay? Soldiers on the front line. They were there doing their job. Patriots doing it with integrity is from what I could tell, okay? But that is not the same company as Lockheed Martin, okay? Lockheed Aero, the company I was in charge of at the time, they could not share any of their information. They couldn't share contracts or anything with Lockheed Martin because they were seen literally as separate companies. They were separate total entities. And what happens is, as you get to the higher levels, okay, so I have no issue with these companies on the lower levels. I think those people doing what they believe is good for the country. But as you get up into the higher levels now, higher levels, I think that's where the problem is. Now you're talking about these C-level suites. These C-level people in these organizations are definitely part of the problem. Okay, they're definitely part of the problem because now they're the ones that actually are managing these hundreds of billion-dollar contracts. Okay, and then they secure these things right through their connections, calling their congresspeople, who, by the way, they have an inroad with, they're friends with. You know, hey, Mike, maybe we don't want to have that David Grush. You know, if you could schedule the only available 2 skiffs maybe during the week of 26 July, that would be great. You know, these are things they can do, right? They can call in. They have direct access now to these congresspeople. And how do congresspeople have direct access to? The actual officials. They call the officials. Okay, so this would be the train. Defense contractor calls to your congressperson, says, I want this to happen. Congressperson calls to general, civilian, Ron Moultrie, etc. And that's how the process works. Okay, so look at this. From the beginning of 2002 until the end of 2022, individuals and PACs affiliated with the defense sector steered $427 million to federal political candidates. That is basically bribes, everybody. $427 million. They're not just giving this money out of the goodness of their hearts, right? They kill people for a living. Okay, so almost a quarter of that has gone to the campaigns of Armed Services Committee members during that period. And look at this. Defense sector also spent $136 million on federal lobbying just in 2022. They've spent an inflation-adjusted $3.6 billion on federal lobby since 2001. And in that time, they hired over 2,700 so-called revolving door lobbyists who have worked in the same government that regulates and decides funding for the industry. I mean, you don't have to be a genius, right, to see that this is going to cause serious problems, right? During the 2022 election cycle, 8 of the top 20 recipients of defense sector contributions were members of the House or Armed Services Committee. Another 10 are members of the House or Senate Appropriations Committee, responsible for crafting the omnibus bill that funds defense spending authorized in the National Defense Authorization Act. Another 10. That means 18 out of the 20 top receivers of defense lobbying money are directly related to figuring out how much money goes to which contracts and who gets assigned, who gets put into their position, right? Not elected officials, as Tim Burchett said, not elected officials, but the elected officials are getting the money directly, right, to actually choose and appoint those people. Does it make sense? So here's actually the list. Interesting here is, look at these representatives, okay? These are congresspeople in the House. There's 435 members in the House. A normal House election, you shouldn't need $500,000 to run for Congress, okay? It's supposed to be your neighborhood guy goes to Congress for 2 years and then comes back. He takes a break from his job. That was the idea the founders actually made in the Constitution. But here now we see Representative Mike Rogers, right? He received over $500,000, $511,000 for his campaign. That is a lot of money for a representative from a congressional district. I mean, think about that. Meanwhile, there's only 2 senators in each state for a total of 100 senators, right? And the first senators we see are right here. Katie Boyd, again from Alabama, and then Senator Raphael Warnock, a Democrat. So first to see the senator. Supposedly a Senate race costs $100 million to actually run. $100 million to win a Senate race. And also, most of this money goes to the incumbents. Okay, you notice most money goes to incumbents. Why? Because they know these guys. They already have the connections. They've already established the relationship. On each of these committees, okay, you have a chair, which is going to be the majority party, and then the oldest, right, the most senior minority party member is going to be the ranking chair, And so they're going to have the most power, right? They'll be the chair leading along with the ranking member, okay, will be the co-chair. That means people in Congress longer will have more authority. They have more power. So that's why all the defense spending goes to incumbents. Incumbents that are their boys, on their side. They're friends with them. They probably go out on fishing trips. Who knows what they do? But that's basically how it works. Why would a representative need that much money? You know, just seems crazy. So as we get it on here, there we go. Senator Mark Kelly, he got $250,000 for his. Marco Rubio, $230,000. Chuck Schumer, look at this. So he is number 6 on the list. Senator Chuck Schumer. He received $300,000 for his campaign as an incumbent. So the question is, do you think Chuck Schumer has anyone that can call him after paying that $300,000? Yes. There is someone that can call him, okay? And this is just the money. This is just about the money. Remember Tim Burchett, he's also brought up lately that a lot of these Congress people have been compromised or people in key positions have been compromised. So if you can't pay them off, if they won't take your money or they don't agree just at a foundational level, they're not going to play ball, then guess what? You have other methods, right? Again, they put $427 million in the last 20 years, these defense contractors. How much does it really cost to buy a honeypot campaign, right? Is it really that difficult? How hard is it? You know, so I think, unfortunately, this is how it works.
Well, we talked about democracy earlier, and I mean, it's a fiction. People have to understand, like, this whole democratic veneer that we have that's all it is just a veneer. So we don't have a democratic system. What we have is a very hierarchical, oligarchic system that has to pretend it's democratic in order to keep people happy, because that is the ideology that we've had for the last 250 years. And we're attached to that ideology. But the reality has never been that. The reality is always that the few rule over the many. All societies, no exception. No exception. So you have to somehow, they have to find a way to convince the many to be happy and to have them believe that, oh yes, you elected these officials. It's a democracy. It's not a democracy. It's not that. And so in whose interest? Well, it's always in the interest, and I say the state. So the state is, you can say it's an artificial construct, but it's actually deeply embedded in human society, going back into our prehistory, actually. So everything that's going on to benefit a group benefits the state. Now, what is the state? Is that the United States government? Is that the Australian government? Well, increasingly, we're moving into a global internationalized system. I mean, obviously, you look at any single European government, and they're all puppets. 201. They're puppets of the EU. They don't really run their own state. So we're looking at the creation of a supranational, an international, unified. It's not complete yet, where it's in the process of being created, but that's where this will all go. It's going to go to an internationalized but centralized control system that has a monopoly of legal violence upon the world. That's what the state really is, and they will benefit. And if there are residual benefits that go to whatever people are around in the future, then sure, they'll get some of those, and you throw the people a couple of bones so they're happy. But that is our system. And that as far as I can see, that will be our system. People may be happier in the future if they can just zone out with whatever drugs are available in their virtual reality fantasy world. But in terms of actual power, they will be powerless. but the state will have all power. I think this is what I believe, and
yes,
it's my black pill for the listeners.
yes.
The motto, Unite Behind the Science, was an echo of a statement from the Rockefeller Brothers Fund's Special Studies Project 60 years earlier. And that was also when they decided that climate change was something that could be very useful. At the same meeting, the Club of Rome declared a planetary emergency facing climate, biodiversity and health. This was eerily similar to the scenario Fortress World from the Great Transition Initiative from 2002. The forces of global order take action. International military, corporate and governance bodies supported by the most powerful national governments form the self-styled Alliance for Global Salvation. Using a revamped United Nations as their platform, a state of planetary emergency is declared. The alliance would then implement draconian measures. In 2002, we said this. The scenarios tell a lot about the future agenda. Less than a month later, the exercise event 2-1 was held by Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security in cooperation with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and World Economic Forum. It was stated that a severe pandemic which becomes Event 2-1 would require reliable cooperation among several industries, national governments and key international institutions. They needed to prepare for the event that would become a pandemic. It was prophetic words. On March 11, 2020, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus from WHO declared a global health emergency. It started a chain reaction that closely resembled Rockefeller Foundation's lockstep scenario from 2010. A world with tighter down government control, with citizens willingly surrender their freedoms. 3 months later, Klaus Schwab declared that the world was in need of a great reset.
Now is the historical moment, the time, not only to fight severe virus, but to shape the system.
Why should people watch this video, Philip? What is this concern about?
Well, I'm about to deepen what I said in the European Parliament on the 13th September. I'm personally concerned about, most of all, the new international health regulations, because they will bring about a regime by which the World Health Organization will be granted the power to, at any time, suspend our constitutions, to suspend our human rights and international law, and with permanent effect, thereby assuming and abusing global power and ultimately causing harm, maximum harm to people's health, maximum harm to economies and to our democracies.
And this is all happening now by default.
Yes, this is right. Negotiations are underway, and the vote on what I just mentioned, that is the international health regulations, the amendments to it, that vote will take place next May in Geneva at the occasion of the World Health Assembly. And then right afterwards, these amendments will come into force by way of an automatism. There will be no vote in the national parliaments, and therefore we should be worried about and make sure that ultimately these international health regulations amendments will not come into place. In my view, even the negotiations should be stopped immediately.
So this is this sounds like a really stealthy process by an international organization to take over many aspects of what should be domestic governance.
Yes, absolutely. They claim the power on the total power on the pretext of protecting us against biological threat. And what they do is they use and abuse this pretext to self-authorize them to ultimately impose on us all kind of measures where nobody knows the effect of them, that can be harmful, and without asking us, and obviously without any informed consent. Most of all, they are totally immune. They are not subject to any liability, the officials from this World Health Organization.
Mm-hmm. And of course, we're not saying it's true in this situation, but threats can be generated to facilitate a response sometimes.
Yes, absolutely. There will be a new widened concept of what is called public health emergency of international concern. So the emergency for a pandemic. The widening concept comprises things like even climate change, reduction of the CO2 level will matter. All kinds of elements can give rise to a proclamation of a new pandemic. And so we have the total, rule of emergency logic threatening us to become the new normal and our constitutional normal to become the absolute exception in the future.
So the WHO can define whatever it basically likes as a threat and then impose these draconian powers on individual nation states, whether there's a real threat there or not.
Yes, absolutely. And most significantly, they will define what kind of medical substance they deem to be the only ones that shall be applied by people and how much that should be done, the percentage, the coverage of these injections on all the population, without actually telling us what the content of the substances is, and obviously without any proof of efficacy and any proof of safety. We have seen that in the past 3 years.
Yeah, that sounds pretty terrifying, that medication could potentially be inflicted on people with the power of the nation state behind it. This is a really frightening development. Shall we go?
The WHO claims in these two legal instruments an absolute and non-questionable leadership in all health matters as soon as WHO refers itself to pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. WHO claims to have the ultimate expertise and the ultimate power in all aspects of this wide field. I recommend to read carefully the current existing draft of the amendments of the International Health Regulations, Article 13a and Article 42. It shall be granted the power of a massive self-authorization whenever it claims to act under this purpose. I recommend to read Article 12 that establishes the preconditions for public health emergency of international concern, together with Annex 2 of the proposed amendments. On the basis of an extremely vague concept, One Health, which basically means anything and nothing, animals' health, ecosystem, concerns about the level of CO2, and of course human health can give rise to permanent measures and even to a public health emergency, to a pandemic called out and declared by the WHO. And thereby, number 4, WHO has the right, will have the right to not only declare recommendations made by several experts, but also to impose on the people of this planet, or only to a certain region, all kinds of restrictions, access restrictions, lockdowns, surveillance, and experimental treatments. So far, the list of these potential measures can be found in the International Health Regulations, Article 18. And there you will also find one example of the precondition of the proof of vaccination. That was so far meant to be non-binding. In the future, as the word binding is eliminated, and as we have explicitly written down in Article 13A, the proposal, and 42 of the proposal, the commitment that the member states will give when they accept these amendments, the commitment that they will have to apply the proposed measures. This is not enough. Further, WHO will most notably reserve and assume the right to define as the sole instance on this planet and to control all information that it claims to be related to health. And this assumes as well the right for censorship and the right to interfere in social communication. It seems to be so important to the WHO that these provisions can be found in both of the international new agreements, in the international health regulations and in the new pandemic treaty. And last but not least, of a brief summary that should any time be given once we speak about these new changes, is the fact that there is no mechanism foreseen that will allow the people or the member states to challenge the assessment of WHO, whether it is the WHO's assessment about a public health emergency, or their assessment with respect to certain measures, or when it comes to the imposing of a regime for what they call vaccination, as experimental as it might be. There will be simply no stop button for none of the member states, and not, of course not, for us, the citizens. So now, if we just look at it as a whole, this right of WHO to self-declare, to also auto-authorize itself to claim a public health emergency of international concern and to maintain it for as long as it wants. Number two, to issue so-called recommendations that will be legally binding and that will be subject to a system of surveillance of the people, surveillance of the member states, then the total control and monopoly on information, including the right of censorship, and then the fact that there is no mechanism of control, the control of WHO, and of correction. What do we have as a result? Well, it is very simple to say. Without the open and the open debate, without the possibility of having different opinions, different hypotheses, different methods to be discussed at the table, there will be no science. And there will be ultimately no democracy. And there will be no legal court proceedings and no justice. If the result is already predefined by one sole authority on this planet, there cannot be, by definition, a proper scientific process, a proper decision-making process. There cannot be any democracy. Number two, it is a basic principle not only of international law, not only of national constitutional law, that we have, as human beings, the right to know what we consent to. So if we ask ourselves, have we been asked, have we been informed about this process that is about to become reality? The answer is no. And there is one important distinction to be made between these two legal instruments. The new pandemic treaty will be considered by WHO itself as a treaty, and thereby shall be subject to a national process of debate and ratification, but not so for the international health regulations. The international health regulations, by definition of WHO's own writing, when you read the international health regulations, they are qualified as health regulations according to the WHO Constitution, Article 21.
And what does that mean? As a consequence, there will be an automatic coming into force right after the vote in 2024. So far, it is still 24 months, but these 24 months have been reduced to 12 months only. So that means that at the end, after May 2025, the international health regulations will become law automatically. So we will not be asked, we have not been informed, and there will be a process of automatic enactment of the international health regulation. This is about as severe as it can be when it comes to the violation of the principle of an informed consent. This principle does not exist only on the individual level, but it exists only also for democracies as a whole. And it exists under the title of self-determination of the people, which is one of the founding principles of the United Nations in the United Nations Charter, Article 1 of 1946. Now, this is the reason why we should all get to know not only what is in these documents, but we shall claim and clearly say that some of these international health regulations and the changes that are modified and declared there will totally be opposed to what we consider our constitutional order, as there is no public information right, as there will be censorship, as there will be human rights not protected, as there will be no checks and balances, as actually it will be the WHO to determine under which legal status we will have to live. That means the power will not be anymore in the hands of the people. And therefore, these negotiations have to be stopped immediately, and it is a matter and a duty for all citizens now to impose the pressure towards their public representatives, political representatives, to make sure that the politicians, the political representatives, understand that they go on beyond of their entrusted vote they can use. Now, as this is just an overview, and as we are here in Europe, and as within Europe, these rules have been already pushed forward to an alarming extent, we found it important to provide you a more detailed overview on the situation here in Europe.
So this is almost like a pincer movement from the World Health Organization, isn't it? These both derive from the WHO. And for some strange, mysterious reason, they're both running concurrently at the same time.
Yes, the purpose is actually to grant WHO much more power and much more financial means and strengthen their structures to what they call have a better pandemic prevention, better pandemic preparedness, and make sure that these also substances and drugs of all ways, of all kinds, will be equally distributed among the population, which they call the principle of equity. And it seems that this principle of equal distribution between the nations is more important than the fundamental rights that so far we have written in the Article 3, Paragraph 1 of the International Health Regulations. They are crossed out and replaced by this principle of equity.
Mm-hmm. It's not so much the equity that bothers me, it's what's being distributed that I find most concerning, but yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, pretty terrifying. Do you want to talk more detail about this slide, or do you want to go on to the next one?
We can go into the content of the international health regulations, what really should concern everybody. Yes, the next slide, please.
Yeah,
yes.
I think that's coming. There we are.
Excellent. So we see here 6 points, and these 6 points are really concerning to everybody who calls himself a Democrat, for everybody who likes fundamental rights and thinks that actually we are the ones in power. We should self-define our government and the system under which we want to live. Most of all, we want to have an effective protection of human rights.
Yes.
So what we see are here these 6 points. And the good message about these very concerning elements is we can see them very clearly within the international health regulations. So they are in front of our eyes. And so I briefly give an overview and just a brief summary of what, in my view, are the most frightening elements within these new amendments. So number one, the mechanism, that already existing mechanism for self-authorization of the WHO by mere declaration of a public health emergency of international concern. So the abbreviation for that is fake. So this mechanism is widely extended, not only to really threatening diseases, but even to new variants of common flu, or even, as I said, under this concept of One Health, it is extended to problems of climate change or problems of whatever we find in the environment to be a potential threat. So that opens the door actually to a total abuse of power, and so WHO can declare an emergency situation for the entire globe without any real reason, without any justification, and most of all, there will be no remedy, no mechanism to revise this decision. There will be no checks and balances for that part.
A public health emergency of international concern is what I say it is, existing when I say it does.
This is correct.
This is terrifying.
They just need to whisper it into the microphone in Geneva and call it out, and that will change the ordinary course of the entire globe. Can you imagine? Without any proof, without any real substance and evidence, they can just call it out and extend it. As we have seen it already, it was declared for more than 3 years for the purpose of COVID-19. So that we will see more of the same in the future.
And the World Health Organization has been bad enough over these previous 3 years, based on the very weak powers given by the 2005 international health regulations. What like with the draconian powers for the amendments that will be passed in 2024 doesn't bear thinking about.
Absolutely, John. That's exactly the concern. Now, for point number 2, we see clear evidence in this new wording that the recommendations that so far were meant to be just non-binding recommendations will in the future have the character to be legally binding. And we can, if somebody would object to that, go immediately into the respective provisions, the amendments, which is, among others, Article 13A and Article 42. But there's a whole set also in the regime of supervising the implementation of any new legally binding recommendation for the future. So if one member state even thinks, oh, we are not going to apply mRNA-based vaccines, we are rather trying it with vitamin D and with good physical exercise, then this government will be put on the watch list. And there will be the World Health Assembly to decide about sanctions against this government. So we can see that very clearly. The number 3, which in my view is actually the most concerning one, because WHO shall be granted the global privilege of exercising the information monopoly, information control, with the right to censorship, and of course the right of manipulating the people. This shall become the new normal, and of course we have seen that already in the past 3 years. We see it now, how difficult it is to maintain on YouTube or on Facebook an deviating opinion and scientific information as soon as it has come as it comes to mRNA-based vaccines or any critics against WHO. So that's already in place. We have seen that, by the way, in this Event 201 exercise, chapter number 4. They speak explicitly in October 2019. They speak explicitly about this, what they call infodemic. They say, oh, wrong information might be as dangerous as a virus itself, so we have to fight against infodemic. We have to fight against disinformation. So all of that comes together. And if you manipulate long enough the public opinion, if there's only one information and source of information available, then ultimately you cannot have any science. You cannot have any true judicial system and fair trials. And ultimately you don't have any democracy.
It's the same thing again. Truth is what I say it is, existing when I say it is, and you're not allowed to disagree. This is just totalitarianism.
This is the way to totalitarianism. It's a perfect tool in the hand of every dictator, and we must oppose this principle, because we have been fighting for here in Europe, at least for more than 250 years, to have this freedom of information and freedom of speech be protected since the French Revolution, and now they just want to take it away under the disguise of health protection. Yes. So then in point number 4, which is very concerning, and that's an objective point, there's no system, no mechanism that would actually challenge, would it allow to challenge WHO's decision and recommendations. So no checks and no checks and balances, which is a very normal part of every government, of every democracy, of every mechanism of power, in order to make sure actually that there is a quality control, a quality management, and this we don't have it here. They didn't even try to do this quality control with respect to the past 3 years, so they didn't hold an after-action review, something that is done in every government, that is done in military, that is done everywhere where humans do and undertake a huge investment with an external effect. So this basic principle of quality control and quality management was not performed by WHO for the past, and for the future it will be not part of this new set of international health regulations. That's very concerning. And number 5, that's briefly said, of course, they will not assume any kind of accountability for whatever they are doing. So there's no incentive actually to do things better. There's no incentive for WHO to avoid harm. And they are even protected by full immunity. And here in Switzerland, they have their domicile. They even enjoy full tax exemption. So this is an absolute, recipe.
I enjoyed full tax exemption.
Yes, this is actually a recipe and a free pass for WHO to abuse their powers, because there will be no accountability, no punishment whatsoever. And so ultimately, question number 6, with respect to fundamental rights, you don't even have to ask whether they want to write it back again into the International Health Regulations, Article 3, Paragraph 1. It will not matter, even if they would reintroduce the fundamental rights principle in Article 3, Paragraph 1 of the International Health Regulations. I see no chance for an effective protection of fundamental rights and human dignity as long as the entire population and the judges and the politicians will only receive and view one global monopolized truth. So if we only know that all these substances, they are super effective, they are super safe, and they make us strong, what else could then a judge decide about these substances? Just to give one example of many. So I see fundamental rights and human dignity as the result of such a concept I see them coming to an end, there will be no effective protection possible with such a system of international health regulations.
And it's not being too melodramatic to say that this is what previous generations have fought and died to avoid.
Absolutely.
And now it's just being taken by stealth, and our politicians just seem to be saying, "Oh, okay, fine."
It is taken by stealth. Politicians don't know anything about these amendments, and they just let it happen. The only good message we have is it takes place at plain sight. So once a person with a minimum amount of responsibility, once this person would understand what is going on here, actually nobody would probably wish to have such an regime being imposed for the future, for the rest of our lives, where somebody can tell us, oh, now, by the way, we have emergency, you stay at home, unless you have taken 3 shots of this highly experimental, very dangerous drug. Don't dare to even question our orders. Don't go for a second opinion. Just take it. Nobody wants to have this as our new normal.
But it's not even just our lives. I mean, we've seen in some vile regimes around the world, North Korea, for example, that the totalitarian powers have been perpetuated down several generations of dictator, oppressing whole groups of people.
Yes, John, this is actually the most concerning aspect here. By having established this system, it will become very difficult to stop it. There will be no stop button for us. They can perpetuate and even strengthen their power, the WHO power, and combine it with the power of United Nations, combine it with the power of the G7 of the WEF, World Economic Forum, and introduce all kinds of new elements to this so-called anti-pandemic or pandemic prevention.
And indeed, even power to particular wealthy individuals who might be financing some of these organizations.
Absolutely key here, yes. WHO is funded only by 16 to 20% by member states' ordinary payments. So 80% of the payments of the funding of WHO so far in the past years were extraordinary payments. And from these extraordinary payments, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, together with Gavi, which is actually in cooperation with the purpose of selling and maximize the sales of vaccines, they have obviously a business interest. So the majority of the extra funding of WHO came from this conglomerate Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, together with Gavi. That's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is that out of this 80% of extraordinary payments, we have 80% again where payments are made under a certain condition that is defined by the sponsor. So it's a sponsor-driven financing of WHO, ultimately making WHO a puppet and marketing agency for the producers.
In England, we have a saying, in the UK, he who pays the fiddler calls the tune.
Absolutely. That's such a great saying, making things so much easier to understand.
I'm sure you have an equivalent saying in Swiss and German and French.
Yes, we do have, absolutely. Probably in every country.
Sure, yeah. Should we go on to the next slide, Philip?
Yes, we can wrap it up. So all that together, what we have seen now, this new regime, this revision, these new international health regulations, they are toxic by design. Because these amendments to the international health regulations, they allow the WHO to at any time suspend our constitutions, suspend human rights, and even international mandatory law with a permanent effect. And they can extend it forever, thereby assuming and abusing global power, and as I said already, causing maximum harm. And if you go to the last slide, all of this is done most notably with all elements of totalitarianism. They can do it with propaganda, with fear, push it through with executive power, and without, obviously, our consent. We have never a chance and never a saying to say yes to these international regulations, which most of what I just mentioned actually finds no legal basis in the constitution of WHO itself. There is no legal basis in the WHO constitution to make recommendations legally binding, and there is no legal basis in the WHO constitution to exercise propaganda and manipulate people into harmful behavior and into giving their consent, which obviously is not an informed consent without the correct information and the freedom to decide. And ultimately, there will be no remedy and no stop button. They can go on forever and forever. And this is why we have to say, not only stop these international health regulations amendments, stop the process of negotiating immediately. So we have to put pressure on our political representatives. We have to put on a huge pressure on our governments and say the content of these amendments in itself is anti-constitutional. It threatens our constitution. It threatens our future, our business, our lives ultimately. So stop negotiating about these kinds of harmful new regulations. We don't want them. So we have to increase power against that process.
Yeah, thank you. As things stand at the moment, is this affecting all countries in the world? I mean, are we talking about the United States, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, Switzerland, Germany, France, Scotland, England, everywhere?
Well, this is correct. It's actually affecting the 194 member states of the WHO. Yes. So that gives us a huge potential to resist here, to unite over the borders of our countries. And this is what we do already here in Europe with the joint combined, forces between the different countries. Even we reach out and have a good cooperation with our friends in Canada and in the United States. James Rogoski does a great work. Meryl Noss from Children's Health Defense. James Corbett, great work here. And we are about all of, in our communities to produce letters that can be sent to our political representatives to put on some pressure and actually call them to stop negotiations. Stop these negotiations. That must be our message.
And it has to be the head of state, actually, that sends the letter, I think, doesn't it, to say, no, this is not for us. So we have to somehow get to heads of state through our politicians too.
Through our politicians, right. Ultimately, this notification of rejection must be issued by the government, and the stop to halt these negotiations, of course, this is within the competence of the government. But the guardians for our democracy, these are the members of our parliaments. They are responsible to safeguard our rights, the constitutional order, and make sure that the constitution will never become under threat. And that was actually the purpose of the presentation of 13th September in Strasbourg at this expert hearing that was granted by some excellent members of parliament, of the EU Parliament. They gave us possibility to speak out, Christine Anderson and Virginie Joron and Christian Terres. And so all of that was organized by Maria Hubmer-Mock, a doctor from Austria. And so the purpose of that was to shed light on this process from different disciplines, not only from the legal discipline, but also from the medical discipline, then also from a criminal investigation perspective. So therefore, we had these 8 experts there, even from the perspective of mass formation psychology. Professor Matthias Desmet from Belgium was there. So we covered the whole range of relevant disciplines to actually bring light into the dark, because we are not informed. We are absolutely not informed by our media, not by our politicians.
No.
So
the media has let us down despicably, in my view. I mean, if there were thousands of troops and tanks and helicopter gunships at our borders, we would see the threat and politicians would act.
Yes.
This is being done surreptitiously, below the counter. This is a stealthy operation. And to my mind, just as big a threat.
This is it, absolutely, John.
They're just drifting into this.
The threat is either made up or self-produced. Yeah. One way or the other.
But the end result is that the populations are controlled.
The populations shall be controlled, and this is what we have to resist, because we have an universal right of self-determination, the self-determination of the people as collective, but also the right for self-determination of the individuum. This is pre-existing to written law. It is pre-existing to governments. And it is written down, actually, in the United Nations Charter of 1945. This is Article 1. It was written down as a consequence of the two big world wars to something that we never wanted to give up again. And now we put it at stake. No, this is absolutely not acceptable.
Yep. So we need to try and mobilise our politicians, tell them about this danger. The fact that they haven't recognised this danger already is at least disappointing. We would expect them to be vigilant of our personal freedoms, but it seems they're not.
Absolutely.
So if we remind now, if world leaders are watching this, and they all immediately send these letters off to stop these regulations, that's good. If not, then the individual people that are watching need to contact their politicians to tell their heads of state to get their acts together.
Absolutely. This is what we have to do, John.
Now, what we're going to be looking at, I think, is a genuinely transhumanist future. I have this feeling that genetic manipulation and modification may happen much faster than we are expecting. I think we may be getting to an inflection point where that maybe the next generation, maybe the one after that, but maybe the next generation will be much more genetically modified than we are, have expected. I don't know, but so we're very flexible. Really the key now is that we're on this fast track of science that is really controlling us. We don't have control over this. We like to think we do. We play this game of pretend like that we have this ability to manage where we're going to go in the future. And I don't think we have any such ability. I think we have no ability. You've got some of the AI people saying, well, we need new established laws to protect people's private. Yeah, okay. How long is that going to last? 10 years, 20 years, 50 years? It's not going to last forever. And we all know the dam's going to break. There'll be a new false flag, a new wave of terror, a new version of COVID that will, in fact, there's supposed to be a new one now up in Canada, from what I just heard. Something will be employed to scare the living hell out of people, and they'll just cave. And the system will have its way, because the system demands total digital compliance and digital control over the society. It does not allow otherwise. We serve the system. The system does not serve us. We serve the system. And the logic of this system is inexorable, and it demands this. And
the energy system is also set to transform, to shape a global smart grid, and to create the internet of everything, where things and people are connected into one global net, with data to be shared, monitored and controlled, just like the RAND report predicted in 2006. This comes with digital identities to rule us all. The ID 2020 Alliance was created in 2017 by Rockefeller Foundation, Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance and Microsoft. This will introduce a system with carbon credits, with allowances on how much or what we can purchase and eat without risking the planetary health. Do you think Henry Kissinger will have a card like this?
So what's the transition? Well, the transition is this. National ID or passports, people say, well, it's not the mark of the beast. Well, let me tell you, it's a baby step away. And you'll see Mr. Sensenbrenner there kind of staring out with his fat, pudgy little face on that real ID card. And the next step is the implantable ID. And you can see the little claw around the side of the face of that young lady there that is getting her ID because it's a good national thing to do. And then finally you see the brain interface chip. Literally, you know, George 1 of 7. What they're going to do is they really do want to make a hive mind. And this is not imaginary, and they have the technologies to do it. The next evil technology is biometric tracking. And it's not just RFID chips that are passive that can be tracked at 120 centimeters from the reader. These are active chips that can be tracked from space. And the global chipset is tracked from the GPS system in Colorado Springs at Schriever Air Force Base Falcon, which is the most secure military facility on the planet. It's 3 higher levels of security than NORAD. Nanotechnologies. They want to alter your genetics. They're altering your food now. These GMO foods, I call them GNO Franken foods. And the new nanotech foods are 10 times even more dangerous than the nanotech genetically modified Franken foods. And then quantum computing. And you have to see how they all tie together. So there's a circle of the electronic cage. And you look at the first, you see the RFID chip at the top, biometric ID. And those biometric IDs, and I was told that this is the way the technology is going to work. They're going to have what's called an opening code to your database, which will be in this huge quantum array, but they'll have it dispersed in other databases. And a lot of the data will be carried on the card that can be read by a reader. The opening code, this is actually what I was told back in 1998, would have something like 3 6s. First 6 would be a mesh barcode, which will identify where you are on the planet with 99 blocks on the Earth, 99 smaller blocks and 99 smaller ones will identify exactly where you reside. Second would be your age and year, month, day, and international dating system. And the third would be a number based on genetic subtype for your DNA haplotype for transplantation. So based on your numbers, they could know immediately if your organs could be taken and transplanted to someone else. Just like they do in all the prison systems in the Laodai camps in China, which is the most favored satanic nation. Next step is quantum computing. When you have these teraflop supercomputers like Big Blue here in California, and even more powerful ones that they won't talk about, like the gallium arsenide supercomputers made with chips that are kept supercooled at 200 degrees Kelvin below zero, that can make 100,000 times more calculations than a Cray 4 computer that has more computing power than all the computers in history. Then these can do array modeling of your brain, and they actually have a thing called a virtual cities program. I had employees that were in Denver that were working in the center of the virtual cities program is to make a cybernetic model of every living thing, of every person, of every building, of every road, of every city, of every vehicle in the earth in a cybernetic model, virtual world, in hyperspace, in their supercomputer quantum arrays. And I took care of the employees that worked on it. They have it to a tolerance of less than half a centimeter for every single building and every road on the planet. And so they're building this, so they have a cybernetic model of all things. So that's why they want to put an RFID chip in every bottle of water, even every pill. So every OxyContin you have, they will be able to follow from your tongue to the disposal sewage containment facility. Okay? That's the kind of control they're talking about.
So what happened is that he gave me this interview, and in it, he talks about the development of RF radio frequency chip implants back in the 70s and 80s. And when he was developing, it was totally an accidental thing that happened. He was with a company that developed it. He then got called into the CIA, and they started doing special programs for the CIA. to develop it. And at a certain point, Siemens in Silicon Valley manufactured 2 billion of them, with a B, of these RF chips. And the way they work, I mean, they can be so miniaturized, you could eat something with it, it has a radio and it can transmit not only where you are, but the really advanced ones have a neurophone capability to control thought and behavior. Very sinister stuff. So you can actually do a lot of psychological warfare with these RF frequency chips. Now that was the early stages in the 70s and 80s. Now you figure, 40 years later, they're more and more and more and more sophisticated.
They want citizens with an RFID chip in your passports. They want them literally in the vaccines. They developed an RFID chip to be put in vaccines at the University of Texas in Austin that is 1/20th the width of a human hair. They can be analyzed and measured at 20 to 30 centimeters from the body.
No promises, but I'm trying to land Bill Gates' endorsement of the platform. Matt Hancock, tell him that considering how many people I'm getting his chips injected into, he owes me one. So there's almost an implication here that Bill Gates was gaining financially from the vaccine rollout. But anyway, this was treated as a joke.
Well, the European Medicine Agency in documents showed that the purity of the mRNA was only 50%. What does that mean? There is a lot of microRNA in these vials that isn't coding for spike protein, may not code at all, but may code for other proteins. Same thing in Australia. The vials weren't pure, so instead what did the agency did? They just dropped the standard and said, okay, 50% is okay now. That's not what we do with medical drugs or therapeutic products at all. And here we have from Comirnaty cell studies that these cell cultures are making a protein that's supposed to weigh 141 kilodaltons. That's what the spike weighs. Yet they're making something that weighs 190 and 100. They're making other proteins other than the spike protein. Are these carcinogenic? Maybe.
World Economic Forum has already prepared a new meal, a food system transition that will change what we eat. Synthetic food, insects, and a digitized food system.
Bill Gates is now the largest farmland owner in the United States. Why has Bill Gates become a kind of tech old McDonald? Let's investigate it and work out, is he simply pursuing a plan to help people, or could there be another explanation?
Bill Gates has been snatching up 242,000 acres of farmland.
Snatching? Yeah, give me that.
Enough to make him the top private farmland owner in America.
Farmland has proven to be an attractive asset for professional investors with almost uniformly positive returns since the early 90s. A core theme for professional investors in farmland is supply versus demand and the associated asset stability produced by it. The amount of farmland in the US is shrinking at a rate of almost 3 acres per minute. However, the world's population is soaring past 7 billion. Food demand is growing and farmland and freshwater are increasingly becoming valuable resources. Here's some quotes that we see come up a lot in the comments. Henry Kissinger: control oil and you control nations, control food and you control people. Robert Kiyosaki: the rich don't work for money, they work for assets.
Bill Gates, for so long the world's richest man, who famously announced he would give most of it away and spend his time and vast resources on the world's poor. His foundation, worth more than $50 billion, run with his wife and investor Warren Buffett.
He's married to Warren Buffett? What's next? How much power do these guys need?
His wife and investor Warren Buffett has, with great success, targeted massive killers like malaria, TB and AIDS. Yet as Mr. Gates' powerful friends gather in Davos.
The idea that there's anything going on at Davos, it's just a bunch of guys and presidents and billionaires just meeting up, hanging out and just making inconsequential decisions.
The latest warning that the Gates Foundation has become too powerful and may not be the force for good so many world leaders say it is.
What else does Bill Gates invest in? Gates also has investment in GMO crops, seed patents, synthetic foods, artificial intelligence, including robotic farm workers, and commanding positions in Coca-Cola, Unilever, Philip Morris, Kraft, General Foods, Kellogg's, Procter & Gamble and Amazon, and in multinationals like Monsanto, Bayer that market chemical pesticides and petrochemical fertilizers. Gates also has massive stakes in the oil majors Exxon, Chevron, ConocoPhillips and Shell. He owns the world's world's largest private jet company and its investments in coal generating fleets, including the Canadian National Railway and CSX Richmond.
The study from the pressure group Global Justice Now paints a picture of the Gates Foundation partly as an expression of corporate America's desire to profit from Africa, and partly a damning critique of its effects. Among the many criticisms, the idea that private finance can solve the problems of the developing world. Should poor farmers be trapped into debt by having to use chemicals or fertilizers underwritten by offshoots of the foundation?
There was a huge seed kind of Noah's Ark project that was going forward in Norway, and it had been going on since the late 60s, in fact. And a story came out just around the same time that Bill Gates was buying up all this farmland in America, that he had somehow bought what I thought was a nonprofit seed harvesting facility. And somehow Gates has his hands on that as well. So these people don't want us to have the ability, if they mess things up, to come back strong on our own. They seem to want to preserve every option to themselves. And I think this is the great mask that's coming off, which is they've been hiding these realities from the average citizens for many, many years. And here we are, evaluation of the latest election. Okay, this is RFK Jr. This is the text that got him banned. And I want you to listen closely as I read this. He is in a conversation, and he's doing a little back and forth. And this is the key portion of this whole thing. Okay. I have a piece that I interviewed you for extensively that's running in The Defender this week. The Defender is his newspaper over there at Children's Health Defense, about Bill Gates's new feudalism. The U.S. papers finally recognized the tip of the iceberg of what's happening because they discovered suddenly that he was now the biggest owner of farmland in the United States of America. I can't think of a more terrifying, aside from the fact that he owns so many of the satellites. This is a person who has no regard for human life and wants to harvest the human race, and he's the biggest owner somehow of farmland in America. Absolutely terrifying. Okay, back to RFK Jr. He did this health campaign to take over our farmland. Nobody knew he was doing it. He was buying it through shell companies, Cascade Investments, and other means. And what I do in this article with your help is connect what he's doing in this country. He's also investing in Alphabet, which is a Google company, and developing robotic farm workers that will replace farmers. You're never going to replace that knowledge base. So it's a very dangerous move, actually. He's developing artificial intelligence and stealing the knowledge as he did in India. And let's remember, Gates and that whole Monsanto push threw these farmers off their farms in India, and it was incredible humanitarian nightmare. Remember, that's who you're dealing with, not the glorious Gates that they try to present to you through the media. In fact, those of us who worked in tech journalism, as I did for a decade, know very well that Gates' reputation was as basically a very cutthroat pirate style, really just one of the worst, most unethical operators in the entire space. He's developing artificial intelligence and stealing the knowledge as he did in India from the little farmer. He puts cameras in their homes, in their fields. He puts sensors everywhere to figure out how they were using the seeds. And then he took the seed banks. Listen closely. Remember, they threw him off Instagram with 1 million followers. Listen closely to what he said that got him thrown off. Talking about Bill Gates, he of the Bill Gates Foundation and the COVID vaccine and all that WHO funding. There's 15 seed banks around the world that store all of the heritage seeds of humanity, 786,000 species of seeds. They're there for humanity, for the commons. And he has taken over that seed bank, consolidated it, and is now privatizing it. Now, this was something that was set up specifically for humanity to survive. These seed vaults are in Norway, Denmark, and other places. And here Gates went in, took over, paid people off, And now he owns those seed companies and he's consolidating them. Now they're privatized and they're changing the genetic makeup of those seeds. This is an outrage, an absolute outrage. Making it so they are chemically dependent so he can patent all of the life that has developed over 20,000 years of agriculture on this planet. It is undeniable that that is what he's doing. They're trying to patent life and sell it back to you and control you, because if you don't play ball, zap, your little chip goes off and you're not able to play ball anymore. By the way, that's why I'm no fan of digital currency. I want to start telling this story about what happened during the Green Revolution, which was started by the Rockefellers, mainly in India and Mexico. And remember how good that sounds? Oh, hey, it's the Green Revolution. Right, we want a green planet. And all it means is these very small entities, so-called elite entities, get together and figure out how to harvest all those things that humanity needs, like seeds, like water, like access to food, and figures out how they can consolidate, own them, and then give it back to you like you're some serf back in the Middle Ages. And they started doing the same thing here, and it's the same thing he did with vaccines. There's a human problem, which he says is hunger or disease, and I'm going to solve it with my technology, which is GMO crops, patented seeds, synthetic foods, chemical agriculture, pesticides, petroleum-based fertilizing monocultures, etc. And he went into 13 African nations and forced them to do commodity agriculture, to accept his inputs, built a supply chain, and now there's 131 million people starving in those nations. The starvation rate has gone up by 30%. It hasn't fixed anything. None of those GMOs have done jack for the average people in Africa. And he's now trying to do the same thing to the rest of the world. And I know you've been active in Africa, he's speaking to his guest here, and fighting them there for many, many years. And that really helped alert the world about this. It's not about farming. It's not about food. It's about taking over our land and giving us really unhealthy food, unquote, RFK Jr. After this, zap, say goodbye. They pulled the platform underneath RFK Jr. And why? Because he was telling the truth. And remember, the penalty for truth in this Orwellian culture is censorship. This is what we're seeing over and over again. RFK Jr. understands it very well. His uncle, JFK, who we started the show off with, understood it very well. One of the things that RFK Jr. learned from his dad, RFK, was people in power lie. And we have to accept that fact. You mentioned farmland in there. We noticed that last year it was revealed that Bill Gates became the principal owner of farmland in America.
Right.
And he did it through little shell companies, trying to keep it under wraps.
Right.
What's going on there?
Well, while you're making money on your Bitcoin, your parents are selling the family farm to Bill Gates.
Right.
Right. And he's going to feed you synthetic food and insects. Right.
The insect diet is coming in the future. This is what they're pushing. The Impossible
There's
Burger.
a plant. Somebody just built a plant. They're building a plant. I can't remember where it was. I think it was Indiana. The first insect food plant.
This is where they're headed.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
sort of
Now it's funny because the young man that I was talking to on the Bitcoin interview basically said, first you make your money in Bitcoin and then you arrange food. And I don't think he realizes it takes many decades to build a successful farm with real food, producing real food. You know, you can't just order it like an aspirin when you're ready. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It has to be there. If there's no land and no farmers available and no 20 years to get it going and make sure it's working right and calibrate it. In other words, human systems aren't digital systems.
Right.
So I can take $1 billion and get a digital system up like that. But I can't take $1 billion and get a living system up like that. It doesn't work that way.
What is Gates doing buying up the farmland?
I'm assuming he's doing a good job of investing his money. I mean, that's
is there a consolidation that they see coming, a food crisis could help them, and he wants to consolidate that?
Well, I think the question is, where can you put money that has a good strategic position and can produce a long-term yield?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a no-brainer. If you look at, we did a big wrap-up on food called Global Harvest.
Yes.
And one of the things we were able to show is we've been in a period of relative food stability, but that was going to come to an end. And when it came to an end, one of the most important points for any country was, were you a food supplier or were you food surplus or food deficit? And what were the politics and the economics of that? And, it's pretty clear that having control of significant amount of food supply in this environment is a great strategic position to have. So, and it was clear that certain kinds of food investments were going to be great investments to make.
Nice.
So I think he's thinking using synthetic food and technology, he can get an edge. But, so I'm assuming it was just a sound financial investment. Whether or not he wants to take the land out of use, so there are games you could play on climate change where you could make more money, but he might just want to take it out of use, because if you're going to try and finance synthetic food, taking the farmland out of availability is a great way to market your synthetic food.
Central bank digital currency is now being introduced. This is also a major theme for the G20. It gives central control over every transaction. A social credit system is in line to be introduced in order to rate and influence our behavior. And on top of it all, a digital guard that acts as judge and overseer. A cybernetic world organism. Joël de Rosnay called it the macroscope, a tool to study, predict and direct human activity. It also goes back to the science fiction writer H.G. Wells' vision of the world brain, as well as Oliver Rice's The World Sensorium. All for the care and maintenance of a small planet that Barbara Ward called for in 1972.
Right. And that's not to say that in a well-governed society, cryptos couldn't be great. They could. But
Right.
we're
Yeah, I
not in a
understand.
well-governed society. We're in a centrally controlled society that wants to exercise complete central control. And in that situation, crypto is the most dangerous thing you can do. Use cash.
Yes, cash is king.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, a healthy system is part analog and part digital.
Mhm.
You have excellent digital and you have excellent analog. And the mistake we're making is we're allowing Mr. Global to take it 100% digital, at which point we're in a digital concentration camp. We're toast. If we allow that, we're toast. It's over.
And that's the central banking digital currency. That's
Yes,
that with
essentially,
the,
yes.
the digital ID, the merger of those two. That's it.
You're in a slavery system. You're going to be in a digital concentration camp. If they want to take your kids, they will. No law. There's no law. It's a slavery system.
Right.
They'll do
And
whatever they want.
they could even do it and morally grandstand that they're doing it for climate change, for example.
Oh, right. Right. Cannibalism, good for climate change, Now, what this comes down to is how effective. So I'm looking for a new word to describe what I've been describing the phenomena of controlling people's minds and spirits, mind control or entrainment.
Mhm.
But I was just looking at a picture somebody before and after, sort of when they were completely a prisoner of social media and their phone. They were in the smartphone trance versus, they broke the addiction and just got away from the whole thing.
Mhm.
Radical, different, much more time outdoors, much more time with people. One person is literally it's like their whole aura has been sucked into the machine.
Right.
You know, I come back to William Gibson, who is an author, science fiction author I love. And you know, in Neuromancers, in his books, people are jacking themselves into the machine. So their bodies are still in the chair, but their mind and their intelligence and their reality, their understanding of themselves, they've literally jacked in on the internet. And so, but when you look at a person who's broken that addiction, instead they have a powerful aura, and they have, you know, thousands of energetic or millions of energetic connection to all living beings around them, people, trees, you know, and it's much more complex and much richer and much more powerful. They have personal power. You know, now, you know, in the other picture, they're not even quite there. Their whole aura is disassociated, and they're disconnected from life. They're disassociated. So there's some kind of energetic hacking going on, if you know what I mean. And here's the question. The question for each one of us is, are we resonating with life and each other, or are we resonating with a machine? Because as I went across America, what I discovered was I would literally see people who were no longer present in the world. They were like on their phone like this, and they couldn't talk to another human being. They were just gone. They were in the machine. They were literally jacked in. Here's the thing. If you look at all the terms and conditions on your bank accounts, your credit cards, that's where the control grid is moving in. So we've just had a huge brouhaha where the IRS tried to say to get your refund, you needed a biometric ID, and Congress made them back down.
Yes. They were like, you need facial recognition.
That's the control grid going into place. And I'm sympathetic. In this one, I'm sympathetic to the IRS, because if you look at the fraud they deal with on the refunds, it's frightening. So, you know, they're under siege on the refunds, and I'm sympathetic with their, you know, they're trying to deal with it.
What's the end goal of CBDC?
Complete control. I mean, if you go to Celery.com and click on Cash Friday, you can pull up a video. I don't know. Can you show it in the video? It's 56 seconds.
Yeah.
Hold on. Can you share the screen? Let me just pull it up. This is Karstens, the general manager of the Bank and International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland. And this is October 2020 at a IMF panel on cross-border payments. And when he said this, it was Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve. I thought he was going to piss in his pants when he said this. It was so funny. Hold on. Okay, here we go.
Analysis on CBDC, in particular for the use of general use, we tend to establish the equivalence with cash. And there is a huge difference there. For example, in cash, we don't know, for example, who's using a $100 bill today. We don't know who is using a 1,000 peso bill today. A key difference with the CBDC is that central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use of that expression of central bank liability. And also, we will have the technology to enforce that. Those two issues are extremely important, and that makes a huge difference with respect to what cash is.
You know, and it's funny because I would tell people about the control grid and why they had to be concerned and blah, blah, blah. And they would go like, yeah. And then I play this for them and they go nuts because they suddenly can feel it. They can feel the trap closing in on them.
Yes.
And they're like, oh my God.
From the World Economic Forum, when they go into you won't own anything, it's 2030, but you'll like it. That's one of those things that's waking people
up. Do you
like
it? Oh yeah, I like it. So, well, I always tell everybody what it means is it's 2030. We stripped you of your assets and your mind controlled.
Yes.
You know, and if you don't say you like it, we'll turn off your credit card.
Right. And you won't be able to drive, and no pizza.
No pizza.
All right, so in summary, defense contractors get half of $886 billion a year. That is a unbelievable amount of money. They use some of that money to fund lobbying for certain key people on Armed Services Committee and those who write the actual National Defense Authorization Act. Surprise. So they give money to those people to make sure they have access, make sure they have control. Why? Because the Armed Services Committee actually decides who is going to get ranked, right? So they have the power. They should have the connections with these generals, with these high-level senior officials. So when the defense contractors want something to happen, they pick up the phone or go walk down the hall, meet with their buddies. So they got into office, essentially put into office with money, unfortunately, put into office and say, hey, we don't want that witness coming down. We don't want that Pentagon witness to actually speak up. We don't want that NASA-affiliated witness to go to the hearings. Does anyone know who? Can we find out his name? Can we find out who it is? You know, how did they even find out who it was? So you need someone there who knows who that guy is, can get to the proper information, get someone to call them, get someone to threaten them, do their administrative terrorism. Yeah, I believe that's how it works.
More people believe in UFOs than believe in Congress. And he laughed. And that turned out to be my quote. And I ended up putting it on a T-shirt that I sell on my dadgum website, which is kind of funny. But then all of a sudden, I start getting, and I said, it's just going to be redacted. It'll be garbage. And sure enough, that's what it was, because they said, oh, we're going to release all this stuff. And they ain't going to release anything.
Yeah.
You know, they won't even release the Kennedy assassination files. And Kennedy's been dead over 60 years. There's nobody alive that's even mentioned in those reports. But it's power, it's control, it's money. That's Washington, D.C. So
why do you think they're holding on to the? Because from what I understand, that report was supposed to be released by 2017. Mike Pompeo was director of CIA, if I remember correctly.
I know Pompeo.
Why do you think they're holding on to those?
Power, control, money, all those things.
When we look at these things, there are a number of things that we know that really will open up things and give us a whole different level of knowledge and information and understanding about different events. For example, the JFK records. So I call them stealth archives because we know they're there. We know they make a huge difference, but we can't get our hands on them. And I've made an extensive list through these episodes of what those stealth archives are. And certainly the Nixon time capsule is one of them. Another one that's interesting is a study that was commissioned from 55 to 59 by the Rockefellers, studying all the different layers of society, and the things that they let out were about race relations, economic situation, all this stuff, consulting experts. But the guy that they got in to do the UFO part was Henry Kissinger. And that was put on the record by two different scientists who worked with Kissinger on it. And that piece was never released for the general public. So the Rockefellers have a whole UFO study stealth archive that was never released. So these people know, and I think that some of them have thought to themselves, how would we float this out? Because, you know, part of the myth of the period that we're in and the phony kind of BS Corbell type, you know, circus, CIA circus, Elizondo, George Knapp, you know, all that stuff. And then some of these people, you know, like Knapp, they used to do good work in this field. They got sucked into this. But what's interesting is this idea that the CIA would ever come forward and just give something out to the public. First of all, that's not their role in society, ever. So you'd never have CIA people involved in bringing out, you know, any kind of transparency or disclosure about the UFO file. Why would they ever do that? So whenever you get these intel people, you know, they're usually very well trained in counterintelligence, and they're working as part of an intelligence op for some reason on behalf of the intelligence community. So it's got nothing to do with disclosure. And if anything, it's a gigantic manipulation. The idea is to create enough of a threat and to see if the public will take that threat, so that if you can use it, then to establish some level of emergency powers. If you can establish the threat, you can decide what to do with it. But that's one that they've been building for decades. So you can't underestimate it at all. As a matter of fact, you know, when you saw the COVID op playing out, what was it they were rolling out? They were rolling out this UFO threat piece. So we've covered it pretty extensively here. Anyone who watches this show has a great understanding of that connection between the UFO file and the continuity of government program. And I guess I could, you know, address COG even more tonight. But one of the things I will say about it is, one, it is the department of government that has the least oversight. So, you know, in terms of public oversight, the continuity of government program is just off the charts. So you've got the NSA secrecy, you have the NRO secrecy, you have the CIA secrecy. And certainly all those pieces are involved in continuity of government. But that COG program is so secret that you can apply those rules of secrecy and you don't get the congressional oversight that you get with other things. You know, oh, really? You know, you're over there in Laos blowing up bridges? Okay, you know, well, we're pulling your funding and pulling you out of there. That's one kind of oversight with intelligence people. But if you've built a massive underground infrastructure, which was initially set up to survive an emergency, nuclear was the original one, and which got changed to just, they removed nuclear and just put emergency. So that infrastructure runs throughout the United States and other countries. But when you look at that, how are you going to really run oversight on something like that, except among a few elite individuals and chains of families, the Cheneys, for example? You know, and Cheney was very involved in setting up the second level of the COG program, which was activated on 2001. So, you know, the COG program's real. This isn't, you know, some committee of 500 that we don't know anything about. COG, there's documents, there's a trail of what it is. And people like Professor Scott have put it on the record. And I'll tell you what is the creepiest thing about COG at this point is not its existence. It's that they're very casual about talking about it now. So before it used to be, you know, you couldn't mention it in congressional things. There were no articles, nothing. Now it's like Nancy Pelosi, before she leaves office, she says, well, I had my briefing with continuity of government, you know. That's disturbing. No question about it. Yes.
You have a government that's told us at least since 47 these things don't exist, but now they're telling us they exist and they want your money. That's the other thing. They want our money. They want government, the Pentagon, NASA, everybody's going to want money to study these things. In the Pentagon report, I think it's 56 pages. Read the first paragraph and it said we're going to use, I think use the word robust. You know, I don't know if it's robust resources or whatever to study these things. It's all about money. Yeah. It's just, it is taken from you and me to keep them in power.
I have a very good, reliable friend who is a little older than me, has been around in the UFO field and also in government to some extent, and has friends in different parts of the government, including a very former, very ultra high level person in NASA, excuse me. And I don't want to say any more about this, but my friend having the opportunity to talk to this person about UFOs, engaged with him and essentially got a confirmation that, yes, that's all real, of course. The guy did not want to talk about it. The guy would not talk anymore about it. My friend, being a persistent, sometimes a little overly persistent and maybe annoying individual with some of these folks, but he got this NASA executive high level to just say, look, we are never, ever going to have an acknowledgement of this until we are able to get out there in a significant way, until basically kind of what you were just saying and what Eshed was saying, until we have mastered certain technologies and we can become a genuinely spacefaring. So that is a story that came to me about 4 years ago. And the person who gave it to me, I consider absolutely rock solid, like granite, absolutely solid. So there you go. I think.
And I think that's what, it's just about money. They just want more money to study it. And I say, just turn loose the files, turn loose of everything you got. And then they said, They said, well, what if you saw them with a telescope? Well, we wouldn't see a UFO with a telescope. And they said, and these people said, nothing we have is confidential. That's what they said. Nothing NASA has is confidential. Now think about that. Satellite imagery, all this other stuff is not confidential. So
are they saying it's not confidential?
Entire NASA was not confidential. So
I guess what I'm saying is it below? Are they saying everything is below confidential, or are they saying everything is above confidential? Because confidential,
they said it is not confidential.
So that could be secret and top secret, or that could be completely unclassified.
Speaking out of both sides of their mouth, actually, because as it turns out, they have satellite imagery. And they just said what they were saying was everything they have is open to the public.
Open source.
Open to the public. So I just don't buy that. And again, I think those people there, put them on a lie detector, they're telling the truth for what they knew. They're just the little compartmentalized bureaucrats that they were. And that's all their little world. That's all their little world was their little world, and that's all they knew. But again, it just boiled down to dollars. And I asked them, I said, how are we supposed to believe y'all that all of a sudden you want to study these things when you've told us they don't exist? They didn't really have a clear answer.
Nothing.
It was just like a lawyer.
So,
not a very good one at that.
So are they just asking for money? Like that's literally
they were saying, well, no, we're just doing it. We're studying it within our own purview. But if you read the report, the first paragraph, it talks about, I think it's robust resources. We will be using robust resources to study. Now, where are they going to get that money? They're going to take it away from their ships, rockets they're sending to Mars or to the moon again, or what? And no, they got to come up with new money. And that again, this is just feeding the kitty. That's all they're doing. And you have several different agencies, what I've found out, have said they don't exist. Now several different agencies say they do exist, and they're going to start studying them. So what has changed?
I don't know, but we kind of, let's talk about the money. We talked about this on a little warm-up video, but what I don't understand is there's all the black budget programs, and we had talked about all the money that's going to Ukraine, which is basically feeding the military-industrial complex companies, which are overcharging the government, and that's how we both believe that these black projects are being funded by overcharging the government other areas and then funneling that money in. So do you think that they just believe this is an easy grab now that UFO, UAP
statistically, and then when you see Schumer's come forward with his thing, and then I see all these UFO people saying, "Are you getting on board, Schumer's?" We've got somebody that's really turned on. I mean, you got the swampiest of swamp creatures. I mean, I don't knock him. Every time I've met him and talked to him, he's been nothing but nice to me. But it's just about money. We take in $5 trillion a year, and they want to spend over $7 trillion, and that's a conservative approach to these folks.
Wow. So did NASA? Do they get in depth on what they're going to spend the money on, or is it just, hey, we need more money because we want to study these things? Are they saying, hey,
they couldn't get real specific again, and it's just limited. Their knowledge is limited. It's give us money so we can develop a plan. I mean, that's where it's going to come down to. Give us money and we'll develop a plan, and then we'll come back to you on how we've spent your money. And they'll come back with, it's inconclusive. So why? Because they can continue studying. If they found it and said, hey, we found life. We've got this saucer over here. We've got this group over here. They wouldn't need the dadgum money anymore. So obviously.
Yeah. So in your opinion, this is just complete nonsense.
Yeah,
we shouldn't be giving them.
Give them more money to stay. Listen, if you're going to go to Mars, stick to your knitting. Go to Mars. If we're going to use you to track Soviet satellites, then let's do that. If we're going to, everything else, I think they just need to stick to their knitting.
Yeah.
Because they're shown things that are false. Or they've brought people to them that are false. Or something's created. Because all they got to do is put a bug in somebody's ear, and then the government's getting another $1 billion to study some crazy project somewhere.
Interesting.
Does that make sense?
It does. So the disinformation agent, well, it does and it doesn't. So a disinformation agent is there to, one, discredit
Couple things.
somebody.
Get people off track, and two, to bring in more money. Just to keep the fire lit enough, just get you salivating enough to where you're asking a lot of questions, folks like myself. But I don't want any more money. I don't want the government the government doesn't need it. They need to go back, cut billions of dollars, trillions actually, but that's beside the point.
So if they're discrediting somebody, how would that open people's checkbooks
Well,
up?
if somebody getting close to the real issue, they'll discredit them. Other people, they'll let them go down the rabbit hole so they can get the money.
Gotcha. So it's either one or the other.
Yeah.
Can it be manipulated? Yeah, there's no question about it. That's the nature of the problem that I'm having with so much of the junk that got brought forward during the congressional hearings. The fact that the main, witness, his lawyer, was the architect. That's Charles McCullough III. Charles McCullough III was one of the architects of the Patriot Act. That's on record. That's in his own bio. And I remember some of these fans of Grush who wrote to me and said, how you can't smear a great hero like him by saying he was associated with the Patriot Act. And I said, well, I didn't say he was associated with the Patriot Act. I said his lawyer was. But that's pretty damn interesting, isn't it? And so the guy they show sitting behind him and like yelling out commands when he talks, he's one of the architects of Homeland Security and the Patriot Act. So you have to ask yourself, is that what you want for approaching this idea of the UFO file? This is a serious question. And, do you want that whole deep state, George W. Bush, Cheney, COG operation, Patriot Act, TSA, warrantless wiretap? Do you want those people in charge of the UFO file? And you don't have to. There's no reason to deal with Grush or Elizondo or any of that stuff. There's a whole gigantic network around the world who studies this. You don't need the government version of disclosure at all. I mean, it'd be nice if you had real people in government who wanted to release those things, but sorry, it's not the way it worked out. So when you get guys, in the field like Knapp and Dolan promoting those people and saying, they're heroes, and they're insurgents against the real bad guys or whatever. You can't look when you have CIA people bringing forward this stuff. That's kind of the end of the story. It doesn't, they're under counterintelligence narrative. That's all there is to it. There's no insurgents in the CIA. It doesn't work like that. So get real about it. And, you can get people who defect out of the CIA and, that does happen. But in this case, you don't have any of these people like that. They basically went out with a narrative and did TV shows saying they were whistleblowers. And it turned out that, and it's something we pointed out, is they still worked for the government. And so we asked them, well, you can come on this show. I just want to ask you one question. Do you still work for the government? Those people would never come on this show because I would ask them the one question that the other people were sitting around going, does your family, is this tough on your family? Look, do you still work for the government? Let's start with that one. Oh, you still work for the government. Okay. Well, if you worked for them in counterintelligence, so part of your job then is to, counterintelligence is lying essentially. So part of that job that you have is lying. So if you were told to lie as part of your job for the government, would you do that? So how are they going to answer that? So they can't engage with real conversation like that. So all these people that they lay out, all the TV shows, all the money, all the $50 million that TTSA is in debt for, and the History Channel does the TV shows over it. They can't get to these basic questions about who these people are. That's the problem when you get around the UFO field. The Biden administration asked Congress for $105 billion emergency funding. Remember, emergency powers, emergency funding. This is how things need to be run because they don't have the actual popularity in governance to govern. Popularity is not there. So in fact, what we have going on is, hey, emergency powers, that's how you do it. And the ultimate emergency powers is the continuity of government program. That one, though, they need something very, very specific to set it off. And as I pointed out earlier in the year, we had the trial run of what they can do to set off the continuity of government program, and that is the UFO threat. That's where all those weird things about balloons and New York Times headlines that said, hey, we shot down a UFO over Canada, and the COG commander, Northcom commander, doing all the press conferences for Biden. That was a dry run, and whether or not they're convinced they need to use that for 2024 or lose it as an option becomes the question. But you're going to see the UFO file piece involved in this 2024 election. For them, the next test and the danger of the UFO threat aspect, that they would create a false story about the UFO file. This is what gets confusing because the UFO file is real. There's no question about it. There are all kinds of data points in relation to this. So from our perspective in the study of the UFO file, there's no question that there are UFOs and there's an intelligent operation of that. The problem is the way they want to roll this out, and this relates directly to this election that we're looking at here in 2024, especially when you have two of the main players deeply, deeply involved in that UFO story. President Trump, through his uncle and through his own presidency, creating the Space Force, but that was John Trump, the uncle, over here at MIT, and he was the protege of Vannevar Bush. And what did Vannevar Bush do? He controlled the UFO file for 3 decades. So, his protege, he sends him in to get the Tesla technology and study the Tesla death ray and all that. Is this a guy he's sharing the secret UFO technology with? I think you can rest assured. I think we've put that on the record. So therefore, Trump's very aware of that technology as well. Very tricky situation. Bobby had an opportunity during a podcast, and he said, I'm not talking about UFOs. And I don't blame him because he's been incredibly transparent about so many things. However, you're missing a fantastic opportunity if you're Bobby and you are not talking about the UFO file, because so many people are plugged into this. And what is happening is that CIA narrative put out intentionally by the intelligence community is the one that is dominating in the media, which is the home of the CIA, the NSA, and all those who love to craft narratives. So therefore, these candidates who have a background in it can bring it to the fore. This is the weird thing about what the CIA has done. They've made it okay in their own media to talk about it. So good. Take that opportunity, talk about it, blow the goddamn whistle.
Now, the mother lode, the sort of the crown jewel of that kind of event is what has been planned assiduously since the 1950s. And that is a threat from outer space that is alien, that would unite the world around a military junta, a militarism, that would put all of humanity together, but against one or more extraterrestrial races. Now that plan, which they came up with in the 1950s, has been very carefully rolled out. And as you know from my friend Carol Rosin, who was Werner von Braun, the man who invented the rocket for Adolf Hitler, the V-2 rocket, and who then was brought in under Operation Paperclip by the OSS into our intelligence community and into our aerospace program after World War II. She said that on his deathbed, he said, look, first they had this plan, there would be the Cold War. I mean, we could have had peace with the Soviet Union. Then there would be nations of concern and global terrorism. This we put out prior to 9/11, by the way. Then they would pull out the big one, and that is the threat from outer space. And it's all a lie. And that's what he kept saying, it's all a lie.
So John, any sort of final thoughts here for our audience as we head into summertime of 2023? I mean, I always try to warn our audience to be aware of being used by the deep state, how they're lying to you, the media manipulation, you know, when you see things all happening on CNN and MSNBC and the New York Times all on the same day, that just to be open and aware of how you're being played. What would you say to our audience? Sort of final thoughts here. You've been in the belly of the beast for many, many years. What do you to say to somebody who's a newcomer to this?
All that we're trying to do at this point is save as many lives as we can. That's it. That's it. And if you can understand these realities that alien visitors and true UFOs are not physical, that the government is lying to you as soon as they say certain things. As soon as they use buzzwords like UAP or these vaxes, these needles are for your good. They're to make you a better person, or we're gonna lock you down for your own good. You have to be able to articulate why you know these are lies, these are deceptions, and how we are going to save our own lives and save the lives of others by recognizing these deceptions, recognizing that these things are not true. That's why everything I put out is for people's self-defense, for their self-defense of their minds, because that's the self-defense that's going to save their lives and the lives of others. That's what I want people to understand and people to know, basically. That's the most important thing. Save people's lives.
This is a quote from the political scientist Samuel Huntington. The Davos class have little need for national loyalty, view national boundaries as obstacles that are thankfully vanishing, and see national governments as residues from the past whose only useful function is to facilitate the elite's global operations. Huntington knew what he was talking about. Himself a professor from the Harvard University, a hotbed for the creation of World Economic Forum. Huntington, he was an insider, very involved with power politics, origins and history. In 1956, Special Studies Project was initiated by Nelson Rockefeller at the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. It was an ambitious project that addressed the problems of its day and how to solve them. Nelson, he had presidential ambitions. He had put together a brain trust to bring his aspirations to life. The young academician Henry Kissinger from Harvard was handpicked to serve as the project's manager. Henry, he had previously been involved in a study group on nuclear weapons at the influential think tank Council on Foreign Relations, together with David Rockefeller, Nelson's brother. David, he was a banker at the Chase Manhattan Bank and a director at the Council since 1949. The Council on Foreign Relations was dominated by the Rockefellers at this time and promoted their business-oriented form of internationalism. Henry Kissinger, he became a loyal partner to these Rockefeller interests and has served them ever since. The stated objective with this Special Studies Project was to shape a new world order in all its dimensions: spiritual, economic, political, social. The challenge was, quote, to build a new structure what will make possible the fulfillment of the basic purposes of humanity. To achieve their goal, they identified science and technology as the key to further their internationalist cause. No other area required more cooperation than science. And they identified global health and climate change. This is as early as in the 50s. Especially interesting as these problems span across the borders of the globe. The panel that came up with this proposal was chaired by Milton Katz from Harvard Law School, with David Rockefeller as a member. No, the Rockefellers and climate change, the oil men and climate change is an interesting combination. The Rockefellers, they had already been instrumental in establishing the United Nations, as illustrated by this picture from their website of the Rockefeller Capital Management. You can see all these achievements that are more Rockefeller organizations, and in the middle we have United Nations that they view as their own little club or organization. Henry Kissinger, and he was also the director of Harvard's International Seminar and started the Center for International Relations in 1958. This seminar had the purpose to establish better understanding among a select group of people who will be in top leadership roles in their countries in the years ahead. The seminar was funded by the Ford and Rockefeller Foundation and, as later revealed, the CIA. David Rockefeller himself, he was on the board of the overseers of Harvard and the president between 1966 and 1968. One leader of the future that came under Kissinger's influence was Klaus Schwab, a young economist from Ravensburg in Germany that had come to USA to gain a Master of Public Administration at Harvard. He was the right man for a new mission to further the internationalist agenda and shape a global business institution. This is a clip with Klaus talking to his mentor 50 years later.
Dr. Kissinger, our time, our satellite time is running out. What wonderful opportunity to conclude our week here with such concrete proposals and ideas of how we can really create, I would say, a new world order. And I feel we should be very grateful to you, Henry, for taking the time at a very important day in the United States to be, at least digitally, with us. And on behalf of all those sitting here in the room, I would like to thank you very much. I would like to thank you personally also for the 50-year-long mentorship and all the advice you have given me. Thank you, and we appreciate it very much. Please join me.
That was Klaus talking to his master, Kissinger. And Kissinger, of course, has his masters. In 1970, Klaus Schwab founded the European Management Forum in Switzerland in order to arrange meetings and allow top managers of corporations to interact with all their stakeholders. That means shareholders, suppliers, governments, and civil society. This forum would also spread new management techniques to the Europeans. To the inaugural meeting, Klaus had invited two academians involved with Harvard's International Seminar, Kenneth Galbraith and Herman Kahn. Other notable guests were Otto von Habsburg from the Pan-European Union, Anybody know about the Pan-European Union? And also Dame Barbara Ward from Columbia University in New York. The latter was a British economist that became an early promoter of sustainable development. This was to become an integral part of the forum's agenda. Barbara wrote the book Only One Earth, the care and maintenance of a small planet, as a framework for the United Nations Conference on the Environment in Stockholm in 1972. She also worked together with the Secretary General for the conference, Maurice Strong, to convince the developing nations to go along with the agenda. They were both members of the environmental think tank Club of Rome and closely associated with the Rockefeller interests. Strong was mentoring Klaus Schwab and was for many years a member of the forum's board. At the meeting in 1973, the president of the Club of Rome, Aurelio Peccei, was invited to talk about their report Limits to Growth and the World Problematic. Due to stress with a rising population and unsustainable use of resources, it was concluded that the planet was in need of a global management to take care of the planet. The Club of Rome had been started with a grant from Peccei's boss from Fiat, Giovanni Anelli, a close business associate and friend of David Rockefeller. At the same meeting, the Davos Manifesto was drafted. It stated, among others, that the management has to serve society. It must assume the role of a trustee of a material universe for future generation. It has to use the immaterial and material resources at its disposal in an optimal way. It has to continuously expand the frontiers of knowledge in management and technology. The forum decided that the elites of the world would take the roles as stewards of the planet. This meeting was sponsored by the European communities and Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands. Anybody know about Prince Bernhard? He was the founder of the Bilderberg Group. In October 1973, the Arab countries started an oil embargo towards nations that had supported Israel during the Yom Kippur War. That meant that the price of oil increased with 300%. The oil crisis was a fact. This gave support to the warnings from the Club of Rome about resource scarcity. Later, the Saudi Arabian Minister of Petroleum, Sheikh Ahmed Zaki Yamani, stated this, that Henry Kissinger had been involved and used some of his diplomatic skills to kind of incite this embargo. An eventual rise in the price had also been discussed at the Bilderberg conference in Saltsjöbaden, Sweden in May 1973. Foresight. They had a problem that needed to be solved. To further the aspirations for a global management of the planet, the elite think tank Trilateral Commission was founded by David Rockefeller in 1973. They called for a new international economic order to better manage the world. The member, US Ambassador Richard Gardner, wrote an article in the Council on Foreign Relations magazine Foreign Affairs that explained the plan as an end run around national sovereignty. Eroding it piece by piece will accomplish much more than the old-fashioned frontal assault. Gardner had been a consultant to the Rockefeller Special Studies Project. What we had in mind was a new system that was technocratic, a society built and run by scientists and engineers. A high-tech society managed like a big corporation. Technocracy Incorporated, that had started as a project at the Rockefeller Associated Columbia University in the 1930s, had developed these ideas. As Parag Khanna, a World Economic Forum disciple, recently stated, "If you want a better world for your children, don't hold your breath for global democratic deliberation. The worse climate scenarios get, the more decision makers will be forced into radical top-down measures overseen by technocrats, not activists." And here we see Anthony Fauci, of course. In 1975, World Future Society arranged the conference Crisis and Opportunity, the next 25 years. The vice president, but he was at the time, Nelson Rockefeller, gave an opening address. They discussed the possibilities of creating a new technocratic world civilization and how to achieve this. The futurist, Warren Wager, had his prescription. There is no better time to implement radical changes than after a worldwide catastrophe. It was World Club of Rome's mission to warn about such events, shaping the future agenda. In 1987, the forum changed its name to the World Economic Forum. The new agenda that was come after the Cold War was discussed. Here we see Maurice Strong with science writer Joël de Rosnay. Strong, that had served as head of the United Nations Environmental Program, talked about sustainable development and global warming. Or the warm war, you could say. Whereas Rosnay, special advisor to Prime Minister of Mauritius, is known for the concept symbiont, a planetary superorganism or brain comprising of humans, nations, machines, ecosystems, and networks. A cybernetic organism that the World Economic Forum wanted to bring to life. Strong was part of the United Nations Brundtland Commission together with Norwegian Prime Minister Gro Harlem Brundtland. Both were members of the Trilateral Commission. Their report, Our Common Future, defined the concept of sustainable development. The inclusion of climate change in the report was initiated and funded by the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. I cover this in my book about the Rockefellers. The report was a part of a summit in Rio de Janeiro that was headed by Strong. The conference decided to implement the agenda for the 21st century, Agenda 21, and start the United Nations Climate Convention. The motto for the conference was "In our hands." Whose hands? I think you know the answer. This is some of the guys and girls. After this big environmental meeting, they wanted to start and develop a new ethical framework for the planet. The Earth Charter Commission was born. Queen Beatrix of Netherlands, that is the daughter of Prince Bernhard, and her Prime Minister Ruud Lubbers asked Maurice Strong and the former leader of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, to chair the commission. The West and East was bonded together. Nelson Rockefeller's son Stephen became the project's coordinator. And it's very interesting to note that Royal Dutch Shell, you know, the royals in Netherlands, they have a lot of shares in Royal Dutch Shell, of course, and the Rockefellers with Exxon. These are the guys and girls that want to create our sustainable future. Stephen also gave seed money to the Global Scenario Group in order to create scenarios for how a planetary civilization could be created. This was led by Paul Raskins from the Earth Charter Commission and a member of the Club of Rome. In 2002, they released the book The Great Transition. The cover with a globe in pieces that I put together describes what it was all about. Build back better. They assumed that a general crisis for the needed transformation could be triggered by an unprecedented pandemic. The end goal was to achieve a world union with a world court and a world regulatory authority. Klaus had already started to educate leaders for transformation. This is in Klaus Schwab's own words.
And I have to say, when I mention now names like Mrs. Merkel, even Vladimir Putin and so on, they all have been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum.
Mm-hmm.
But what we are very proud of now, the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina and so on, that we penetrate the cabinets. So yesterday I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and I know that half of this cabinet, or even more half of this cabinet, are actually young global leaders of the World Economic Forum.
In 1992, Schwab and the World Economic Forum had started the program Global Leaders of Tomorrow, with leaders like Angela Merkel, Nicolas Sarkozy, José Manuel Barroso from European Union, Gordon Brown and Tony Blair. In 2004, this program was morphed into a more ambitious 5-year program called Young Global Leaders. More than 4,000 leaders have been involved with these programs. Here are some examples. Sanna Marin from Finland, Emmanuel Macron, France, New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, Leonardo DiCaprio, Alicia Garza from Black Lives Matters, and Sebastian Kurz, Chancellor of Austria. My foundation, Forest Foundation, has in cooperation with the Malone Institute compiled a list of all these leaders and all their occupations, what we are doing and what we are doing now. And it can be downloaded from the Malone Institute's webpage. They are everywhere, we can tell. And here, of course, the dynamic duo, Bill Gates and Justin Trudeau. Happy, smiling. They all talked with one voice. In 2005, the Young Global Leaders started the 2020 initiative to use scenario and visioning exercises to understand current and future trends, risks, and opportunities. Formulate a shared vision of the world in 2020 and create task forces to advance their vision. This was later renamed the 2030 Initiative. In 2006, World Economic Forum released their first global risks report. It stated that the risk of a pandemic flu was a dominant theme in the global conversation on risk, and that misinformation and infodemics could lead to a breakdown of trust. Both had to be countered. The same year saw the release of a military think tank RAND Corporation's report, Global Technological Revolution 2020. It predicted that RFID chips would be used to track products and people by 2020. Big changes was on the horizon. Management of the commons. In 2008, the global financial crisis hit the world. This became a trigger to reshape the system. In the middle of a crisis, World Economic Forum held its first summit on the global agenda in Dubai. The goal was to redesign the international system according to the needs of the 21st century. The world was, according to Schwab, in need of a fundamental reboot. It gave birth to a global brain trust. What have we heard this word before? The brain trust. Rockefeller Special Studies Project going global. The World Economic Forum's more than 70 Global Agenda Council with 1,500 thought leaders and experts, think tanks that would shape the agenda for the coming years. One of those were the Global Agenda Council on Pandemics. The annual meeting in 2009 was titled Shaping the Post-Crisis World and gave birth to the Global Redesign Initiative, consisting of a newly founded Global Agenda Councils. The Global Agenda Council on the Future of Governments concluded in their reports that the current order had 4 governance gaps: lack of trust, lack of incentives, lack of institutions, and a lack of time. The governments were in danger of being irrelevant, and a new approach was needed. The solution was a digital Marshall Plan with e-governments to engage the citizens. It stated that this would help develop better warning systems for disaster and crisis prevention and for preventing problems in the global economy. It would enable new forms of global cooperation and governance. No one should be left behind. Henry Kissinger wrote in New York Times that the ultimate challenge is to shape the common concern of most countries regarding the economic crisis, together with a common fear of jihadist terrorism, into a common strategy, reinforced by the realization that new issues like proliferation, energy and climate change permit no national or regional solution. Due to the crisis, G20, consisting of the world's 20 biggest economies, including Russia and China and the European Union, became the premier political forum to discuss and manage global problems. As the president of the European Council, Herman van Rompuy, said, 2009 is also the first year of global governance, with the establishment of a G20 in the middle of a financial crisis. World Economic Forum was closely aligned. Several of the leaders had been part of Schwab's Young Global Leaders scheme. G20 took over the position from the G7, G8, and is working to establish a new international economic order. They gather all central actors that shape the global agenda, like United Nations, the World Bank, and the OECD. And you have probably seen this. In 2010, Rockefeller Foundation released the report Scenarios for the Future and International Development. It contained scenarios that discussed how the technological development could be furthered or hindered in the future. Lockstep discussed the possibility of a severe pandemic, hack attack, cyber warfare and resource shortages, and Clever Together, a united world that worked together to solve global problems. I will get back to these scenarios. The year after, World Economic Forum started the Grassroots Initiative. Grassroots, World Economic Forum. This global shapers community consisted of people under the age of 30. It has since grown to 479 hubs all over the world with over 14,000 members. The mission is to empower young people to play an active role in shaping local, regional and global agendas. These young grassroots are led by Klaus Schwab and have to be endorsed by an existing shaper or another member of the World Economic Forum community. In 2015, World Economic Forum transformed into an international organization for public-private partnership and was ready for a new, more active role in shaping the future. The time had come for the great transformation. In 2015, United Nations Agenda 2030 with 17 global goals was decided. Schwab and the forum was well prepared. At the annual meeting in 2016, Klaus Schwab declared the fourth industrial revolution. Very satisfied. This is a plan to totally reshape the planet and humanity with digital technology, artificial intelligence, robots, technological brain enhancements, and surveillance from space. What a plan! I hear no applause. I wonder why. Klaus seems very confident in this. The forum was well prepared with its many working groups and communities, all intended to shape the future they wanted. The forum's shapers consist of the leading companies of the world. They engage in the forum's platforms. This is some of them that has paid the most to be on board and shape the global agenda. You can see some interesting companies and also foundations like Bill Gates and Wellcome Trust and big tech, of course, very involved. And Centers for the Fourth Industrial Revolution has since this started all over the globe. This is from the web page of the Russian Federation. Their centers started as late as October last year. World Economic Forum's Board of Trustees consists of the most powerful interests of the world, especially the world of banking. Bank of England, Bank of America, European Central Bank, IMF, World Bank Group, Bank of China, Bank of International Settlements, and as late as 2019, the Russian Sberbank. These are the trustees of a material universe for future generations. This is just some names. Ursula von der Leyen was in the World Economic Forum's Board of Trustees in 2019, before she became loyal to the agenda as a European head of the Commission. Here we also find Larry Fink from BlackRock and David Rubenstein from Carlyle Group. These both men are members of the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission. Rubenstein, he also sits on the board of the Harvard Corporation. The connections are still tight with the university where the ideas for the forum was initiated. In June 2019, the forum signed a formal partnership with the United Nations. Nobody talked about this in the news. No newspaper, no television, no radio, nobody said nothing about this. This has become a powerful alliance to execute the agenda. The cooperation had, however, been going on for a couple of years. The United Nations Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed has, for example, been on the board of a Young Global Leaders since 2017. The forum committed itself to finance Agenda 2030 and work with areas like climate change, health, digital cooperation, gender, and education. The global goals would all be solved through the use of disruptive technologies of the fourth industrial revolution. The same year, G20 in Japan introduced the Society 5.0 concept, connecting United Nations Agenda 2030 with the World Economic Forum's fourth industrial revolution. United Nations, World Economic Forum and G20 forms the troika of global governance. This is the top-down management of the planet, the managers, executing the future agenda. In September 2019, United Nations initiated the Decade of Action. The plan was about to be implemented. Climate activist Greta Thunberg arrived to New York with the sailing boat Malizia to give a speech at the Climate Action Summit. Malizia. Do you know what it means? Why do you choose that boat with a name Malizia? This trip was sponsored by Prince Albert from Monaco, a member of the World Economic Forum. It was a race the billionaires of the world had to win. The motto, "Unite Behind the Science," was an echo of a statement from the Rockefeller Brothers Fund's Special Studies Project 60 years earlier. And that was also when they decided that climate change was something that could be very useful. At the same meeting, the Club of Rome declared a planetary emergency facing climate, biodiversity and health. This was eerily similar to the scenario Fortress World from the Great Transition Initiative from 2002. The forces of global order take action. International military, corporate and governance bodies supported by the most powerful national governments form the self-styled Alliance for Global Salvation. Using a revamped United Nations as their platform, a state of planetary emergency is declared. The alliance would then implement draconian measures. In 2002, we said this. The scenarios tell a lot about the future agenda. Less than a month later, the exercise event 2-1 was held by Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security in cooperation with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and World Economic Forum. It was stated that a severe pandemic which becomes Event 2-1 would require reliable cooperation among several industries, national governments and key international institutions. They needed to prepare for the event that would become a pandemic. It was prophetic words. On March 11, 2020, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus from WHO declared a global health emergency. It started a chain reaction that closely resembled Rockefeller Foundation's lockstep scenario from 2010, a world with tighter down government control with citizens willingly surrender their freedoms. 3 months later, Klaus Schwab declared that the world was in need of a great reset.
Now is the historical moment, the time, not only to fight severe virus, but to shape the system.
It was echoed by United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres.
The Great Reset is a welcome recognition that this human tragedy must be a wake-up call. It is imperative that we reimagine, rebuild, redesign, reinvigorate and rebalance our world. Rebalancing investment, harnessing science and technology, and advancing the transition to net zero emissions, all elements of the Great Reset, are fundamental to building the future we need.
The future you need. Not my future. The World Economic Forum and United Nations had their prescription ready. The working group shaping the future of health had been in preparation since 2016. Here are some examples on their kind of solutions: artificial organ bioengineering, gene editing, preventive medicine, and precision medicine. Do you like that? No? The working group was also deeply involved in the immunization agenda to co-create the future of vaccines. The Commons project was started by young global leader Paul Meyer and Rockefeller Foundation in 2019 to unlock the full potential of technology and data for the common good. We have seen and paid for the consequences. And now WHO plans to build an even more efficient system to manage future pandemics and tackle misinformation. It is planned for implementation in 2024. The new global health architecture is one of the main goals for G20 this year. The others are digital transformation and a sustainable energy transition. As the Club of Rome wrote in 2020, if we don't change the system, more planetary crises and future shocks are coming that will eventually exceed the capacities of governments. This next planetary crisis arrived in late February with the war in Ukraine. Now the new energy crisis has arrived, and a food crisis looming. This resembles the hack attack scenario from a Rockefeller Foundation playbook that describes proxy wars, global food and resource shortages, as well as cyber attacks. As Klaus Schwab said last year, in order to shape the future, you have to control the narrative.
2020 is a year that has really changed the world. It is thanks to technology that we are able to join the cyber polygon entirely remotely.
This training is another step in creating a trusted digital environment and fostering open dialogue to discuss even the most challenging cybersecurity issues.
Nobody can fight these phenomena, which are only going to increase in the next couple of years, this dynamic technological environment.
As this world grows in force, and this happens throughout the world, it's just a statement of the obvious. You need to protect people properly.
It is a very close cooperation between the enemies. This is Klaus Schwab.
Dear Hermann Graf, Your Excellency, Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin, dear participants, it's such a privilege to address you all at a time when we so much rely on digital infrastructure and, of course, its underpinning cybersecurity. I wish to thank in particular my good friend and committed partner at the World Economic Forum, Mr. Hermann Gref, the CEO and chairman of the executive board at Sberbank, and of course also a member of the board of trustees of the World Economic Forum. The forum has built an excellent relationship with the Russian Federation, both with the business community as well as with the government. I was pleased to meet with President Putin last year, and I look forward to deepening this relationship with you, Mr. Prime Minister, and your government.
The relation has been very close. Vladimir Putin and Henry Kissinger has had quite long, warm relations, according to Russian news agency TASS. World Economic Forum has already prepared a new meal, a food system transition that will change what we eat. Synthetic food, insects, and a digitized food system. The energy system is also set to transform, to shape a global smart grid, and to create the Internet of Everything, where things and people are connected into one global net, with data to be shared, monitored, and controlled, just like the RAND report predicted in 2006. This comes with digital identities to rule us all. The ID 2020 Alliance was created in 2017 by Rockefeller Foundation, Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, and Microsoft. This will introduce a system with carbon credits, with allowances on how much or what we can purchase and eat without risking the planetary health. Do you think Henry Kissinger will have a card like this? Central bank digital currency is now being introduced. This is also a major theme for the G20. It gives central control over every transaction. A social credit system is in line to be introduced in order to rate and influence our behavior. And on top of it all, a digital guard that acts as judge and overseer. A cybernetic world organism. Joël de Rosnay called it the macroscope, a tool to study, predict, and direct human activity. It also goes back to the science fiction writer H.G. Wells' vision of the world brain, as well as Oliver Rice's The World Sensorium. All for the care and maintenance of a small planet that Barbara Ward called for in 1972. And now the last slides. The future of the global commons. Last year, Antonio Guterres released our common agenda with 12 future commitments where we bring the new multilateral system to life. It follows the scenario clever together from the Rockefeller report. Centralized global oversight and governance structures sprang up, not just for energy use, but also for disease and technology standards. Nation states lost some of their power and importance as global architecture strengthened and regional governance structures emerged. International oversight entities like the UN took on new levels of authority. In March 18 this year, the former Swedish Prime Minister Stefan Löfven was chosen as co-chair to the high-level advisory board on effective multilateralism, but works to further this agenda. Nice choice? David Rockefeller said in 1991, "It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subjected to the lights of publicity during those years. But the world is now more sophisticated and prepared to march towards a world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in past centuries. This is a very old dream coming true." The New Atlantis by Francis Bacon, about the scientists ruling the world, but in this version with the bankers at the top. But the future isn't written in stone, and now these plans are out in the light. I say it is time that we, as humans, come together and say no to these transhuman fantasies and scientific management of the planet, and shape the future we want as humans. Thank you.
Exactly.
So what is the cabal? For anyone watching right now, I say on our show the deep state all the time. And I refer to the deep state as the permanent government, the people that are there after the 4-year presidents come and go, the senators come and go. These are the people that are unelected that actually run the show. Is the cabal the same thing or different?
They are the same thing because that is a subsidiary of them. The deep state is basically the we say it this way: the deep state is the American subsidiary of the cabal. The cabal is a global international group of the bloodlines. We don't call them families; we call them bloodlines because they have throughout the ages they have reproduced preternaturally. They reproduce and they go by different names. These bloodlines. They change their names every few generations, but they have existed since the beginning, since Babylonian Empire. They are the group that has controlled, let's say, the Roman Empire by lending money to them, by giving them money, and then giving money to the other sides as well. And so they have been able to control both sides in every world conflict, and they have been able to manipulate. Let's say they have been able to manipulate the heads of the Roman Empire. Of the last great success that they had was the Nazi Empire here that almost took over the entire world. So that's what they use now. They use the methods that they discovered during the Nazi rise of power in 1938 in World War II. So they are the banking bloodlines, that have existed for so long that basically tell the nations what to do. That's the cabal. That's who they are. And that's who they are today.
Is that the first time that you discovered them at that military base that day? Is that when you said, "Oh, something else is going on here"? And
is controlling here? Yes, absolutely. That was the first moment when I said, "Okay, U.S. nation authority means nothing here. Absolutely nothing. These guys control everything." And then, the next moment when I realized that was true was I was in the FBI. I was one of the first FBI agents that worked something that we called at that time FISA investigations under the newly formed FISA Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act and FISC, the Foreign intelligence surveillance court as well. It was the first law that got its own star chamber of judges, of courts that were just dedicated to them. But now the reason for that was because the FISA was only supposed to be used against international terrorists and agents of a foreign power, non-U.S. persons. That was the whole basis of the FISA. Well, what I found out later was that in I don't remember the year. It was early 1990s. The New York Times decided to reveal the most top secret system in the nation at the time, which was the FISC and the FISA system. And the New York Times just put out a bunch of articles revealing everything about FISA. We are not even supposed to know the word FISA today. However, the New York Times took it upon themselves to reveal everything. It was all top secret too. It was all top secret. And they told everything about it. And at the time, Bush the elder, the older Bush, was president. And at that time, he said, we're going to prosecute everybody in the New York Times that revealed all this stuff about FISA. We got the evidence. We're going to put them all in prison. And wouldn't you know, the New York Times said, no, he's not. And sure enough, that was the next time that I found out that the New York Times directly works with the cabal and has their authority, basically, because after all that, not a single person was ever questioned or called before a Senate committee or anything for violations of the Espionage Act, which they committed. I mean, tremendously committed. Wow. And that was the other moment when I found out, wow, anybody that's associated with the cabal basically has higher authority than the president of the United States or anybody else. So that's
yeah, we see that with the New York Times, and we see that with the New York Times today as a mouthpiece of the deep state. Still to this day, we've seen that in the Ukraine war, et cetera. So,
well, we talked about democracy earlier, and I mean, it's a fiction. People have to understand, like, this whole democratic veneer that we have that's all it is just a veneer. So we don't have a democratic system. What we have is a very hierarchical, oligarchic system that has to pretend it's democratic in order to keep people happy, because that is the ideology that we've had for the last 250 years. And we're attached to that ideology. But the reality has never been that. The reality is always that the few rule over the many. All societies, no exception. No exception. So you have to somehow, they have to find a way to convince the many to be happy and to have them believe that, oh yes, you elected these officials. It's a democracy. It's not a democracy. It's not that.